You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hi guys, and thanks so much for coming along with me again to Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Well, I'm back in Florida now, and even though I missed a week, and I apologise for that again, this was always the episode that I intended to do, even though I really couldn't face it last week. As many of you know, I asked for questions you might have, and we were pretty overwhelmed by how many of you just asked away. My buddy and podcasting mentor, Glenn Hebert, is a vastly experienced podcaster. He's done over 8,000 shows, and he's a real fan of my show. I wanted him to ask me the questions, and he readily agreed. Glenn runs the Horse Radio Network, and we seem to have a bunch of crossover listeners who listen to both shows, so I thought we'd all get a kick out of this. As I say, I really wasn't up for this last week, and I'd like to thank all of you who told me that you understood. I don't know what it is about the trail. It takes up so much of your life, and in my case, it really dominates every aspect of your existence. When you get home, you miss it with a yearning that, frankly, took me by surprise. Again. But I'm back. I'm feeling vastly better this week, and I'm ready to have your questions from Glenn. That'll be coming in a moment. At the end, I'm going to be reading a new kind of audiobook, Hiking Through by Paul Stutzman. This was one of my earliest AT books, and certainly one that was sent to me or suggested to me by various listeners. And it was definitely an inspiration for me as I was preparing for the trail for the first time back in 2014. Paul kindly gave me permission to read it on the show, so that's what we'll be having over the next few months. But now, settle back and listen to my great friend Glenn Hebert as he asks me your questions and a few of his own.
So, Steve, thank you so much for inviting me and letting me interview you.
The roles are reversed, so I appreciate that. And I think, and it's really helpful to me to have somebody who is not a hiker to interview me to see what the differences in perspective are.
So for you through hikers and you serious hikers, I apologize for all my stupid questions.
There are no stupid questions.
Well, Steve, you asked your listeners for questions, and I got a lot of them. So there's probably 60, 70 questions here. We're obviously not going to get to all of them. So for those that did submit and I don't get to yours, I apologize. But we're going to do the best we can here today. So I'm going to go right for it here. And it's a question that was asked by several listeners, and it's the one I want to know, knowing you for so long and so well. Mm-hmm. Now, how you doing 2 weeks post-trail?
It hasn't surprised me, but it shocked me, if you know what I mean. You know, I kind of knew there would be issues after I finished the trail. And I've come here where I'm living now, just before I move into a new apartment. And I expected to get back into life pretty quickly. I've really struggled reconnecting with any form of life. And it surprised me, you know, that part of it is debilitating, really. You come home and you think, well, what do I do now? And it started from the moment I touched that sign. And it started last time from the moment I touched the sign. I think physically I'm okay. I'm better than I was last time when I finished physically. But mentally, I guess I miss it more than I would have imagined. I haven't done literally any exercise at all. I mean, literally, the furthest I've walked is from the back door to the car, which is in the garage, by the way. So I'm finding it difficult to reconnect with people. I'm not good company with anybody right now, so I'm spending a lot of time by myself, and I'm happy to be doing that.
You know, you said in several of your shows that you think that people who have something to come back to, a job where they have to get back to immediately, or something that they dive into immediately, do better. So I guess what you're saying is true.
Yes, it feels that way, but I'm in this transition period right now. I'm living in a buddy's house. He lives in the UK, so I've got this 6,500 square foot mansion I'm living in, believe it or not. But you think that would be the greatest thing on earth, but really, I want my own place, and I've signed a lease on a place about 2 weeks. That I take over in about two weeks today, in fact, which is great. And I think that will be my start for doing things. And in fact, you're the first person really this is the longest conversation I've had with anybody, I think, since I've been back.
Well, your listeners appreciate it.
I'm glad they do.
One of the questions Jerry said, and that ties right in here, he said, so you successfully committed to a second thru-hike. This is an interesting question. What difference did you anticipate or desire as an outcome of the second trip that you didn't attain on the first trip, and did you achieve it?
I don't think I signed up for any specific outcomes. I think the having a podcast and the having the responsibility, or not the obligation, but certainly the responsibility, where you feel a responsibility to podcast as often as you possibly can. I was excited by that as a prospect. I wanted to lose more weight, but that wasn't a reason for doing it. I wanted to raise money for my charity. That wasn't a reason for doing it. I just thought if I took on a second hike, I would enjoy it as much as the first hike. I thought it would be different, and it is different. It was different, rather. I don't think I was expecting any outcomes at all. One thing I noticed, though, this was a surprise to me. When I went up the top of Springer Mountain to start, touched that sign, I started walking down and got to the car park where some ladies had dropped me off, and I left them. I then walked further into the woods, and it was at that moment I realized I'm really at home here. It really felt at home. I know when I first did it, for example, I had no idea what I was doing. I was utterly clueless.
Well, you didn't even know how to set up your tent the first night.
Not properly, no. I worked it out after about 2,000 miles, so it was okay. I kind of worked it out. And as soon as I was walking, I thought, I know how to place my poles. I know how this works. And unlike the first time, I almost immediately started thinking, I can do this. I'm going to finish this again. And I still had 2,190 miles to go. And that was a lovely thing. In terms of outcomes, I knew I'd meet people. I didn't anticipate spending so long with just one person, Trigger, but it worked out that way. And I think you've got to take the trail as it comes to you, as opposed to taking on the trail. You can't take it on. It will happen to you and you just experience it.
I believe in muscle memory, not only with your muscles in your body, but your brain. I think your brain has muscle memory, and I think you experienced both of those. One, your body had muscle memory. You knew how to hike. And the second thing is your mind knew how to hike.
Yes, it did. I still fell over loads of times. I fell over 45 times first time and 43 times second time.
So I'm pretty better.
I'm two falls better. And the last one was falling down the stairs on the very last day when I was about to climb Katahdin, so that wasn't impressive. Your muscle memory is there. Things that I think I hadn't realized how inculcated the trail was to my mind. I knew how to cope with stuff when you're in your tent and it's raining and the drips are splashing on the earth outside and splashing into your tent. You know how to cope with that. When you're cold, you know how to cope with that. You just put warmer stuff on. So I think muscle memory is a big thing, and it really helped me.
Now, you said at the beginning of your first book, I believe, that you don't know what you don't know when you go into the trail like you did the first time and just start hiking, never having hiked before. This time you went in knowing what you knew. Which is better? Or do they both have their own pluses and minuses?
In many ways, I think, I think the title of the free book I gave away was Hiking the Appalachian Trail is Easy, especially if you've never hiked before, because I literally did not know what I was doing. And so if I screwed up, I wouldn't do that again. Actually, I often did, but I would try not to do that again.
The older we get, the harder it is not to keep doing it.
And this time I knew, for example, my mindset wasn't good for Pennsylvania because I knew these rocks were going to suck. And what's more, they did. First time, I had no idea how much they were going to suck. So it made it easier to do it. So there are pluses and minuses both ways. Once again, you just take it as it comes to you.
One of the things I I heard you talk more, maybe it's because of a podcast. And when you wrote the books, you were time out from the trail, and you probably didn't include this as much because you were away from time.
Yeah.
I heard you talk more about actually being scared in some of the situations on the podcast, which I don't remember that being in your books. Is that because of time, or what do you think?
I think the physical differences between a 61-year-old and a 66-year-old, which you're eventually going to find out, Glenn.
Not too long from now.
Are quite substantial, surprisingly substantial, actually. And so I think the physicality, I always say to people, you're going to get the physicality. And I did get the physicality. But there are times when you're going down these mountains, and you're literally rock hopping from rock to rock. And that one false move could just send you tumbling. Most of my falls weren't on those difficult bits. So while I got the physicality, I think I was often scared because I thought one bad fall particularly would take me out. And I was thinking so much I wanted to get this done, and I wanted to finish the hike. And it became more important to me to finish this time than it did first time.
And that ties a little bit into weather when you're talking about the falls. And Doug said the weather seemed to be better this time around compared to your previous hike. Was this the case? And then I thought about your 100-mile wilderness. The last 5 days tortured you guys. So.
Yeah, well, the weather, I think we were very lucky with the weather. I also think we actually managed the weather well. I think you're lucky when you're a little bit older and you've got at least, I guess, a pension, in my case, and several pensions you can call upon. Some of the youngsters just can't get out of the rain. Trigger and I managed our exposure to rain really well. And often the rain didn't come until 4 or 5 in the afternoon, or even not at all, or later on that night. So we were often in a shelter, or we'd go into a hostel or a hotel or a motel and get out of the rain. But you're right, the 100-mile wilderness. I mean, I loved it. I'm glad I did it this way, because the first time I did it, I slack packed through the first 4 days of the 100-mile wilderness. And I don't think I got that wilderness experience. This second time, I enjoyed it more because I got wet. I enjoyed it more because it sucked, if you know what I mean. And I had a real experience, which I didn't have first time.
Well, let's be honest. You brought this up. Okay. So you stayed in a few more hotels and took a little more luxury trip than you did the first time this time, which, by the way, sounds really good to me.
Yeah. And funny enough, I saw a Facebook post the other day, and I know I shouldn't look at these things because they drive me crazy. And you end up going down a rabbit hole with them. One guy was saying how he thought, taking too many days in a hotel or a hostel isn't a proper thru hike. Well, it is. I don't care what you say.
You still put one foot in front of another for 2,100 miles.
That's exactly what you do. And because you do that, you've done a thru hike. We made sure we covered and we passed every single blaze every single time. Yeah, we may not have had a 4-pack every time. Virtually nobody goes up Katahdin with a 4-pack. Some people do, but good for them. You make the trip how you want to make it. And frankly, I don't think I would have got through it had I carried my pack 7 days a week for all those weeks and hardly ever stayed in hotels. I don't think I would have been able to do it. So I got through the hike the way I wanted to get through the hike. And hopefully when listeners listen to the show, if they're thinking of doing it, do what's right for you. Do not pay any attention to what people say on Facebook when it comes to what the right way to do a hike is.
Well, aren't you? I mean, part of the deal here is you're supposed to be having fun too. And, if fun involves getting off and having beers with Trigger and staying in a hotel more than you did the first time, you proved you could do this the first time. You didn't need to, needed to have some fun this time too.
Oh, we certainly did. And I discovered, which I hadn't discovered, the amount of breweries there are in America on the East Coast.
That came up a lot on the podcast.
Yeah, the breweries were great. I tell you, I love them. Yeah, we enjoyed it.
Did you count you counted the number of falls? Did you count the number of beers?
Oh no, it far exceeded the falls though.
Yes, I would imagine it did.
Yeah, substantially.
Were the beers were the falls the result of any of the beers?
Happily, no.
Okay, good. Just checking.
Yeah.
That one down the stairs, I thought might have been, but.
Oh no. That was first thing in the morning. That was because I wasn't quite awake yet. I hadn't had enough coffee.
Okay, there you go. All right, so let's get into some of the listener questions because they're more technical, and your hiking friends are going to want to hear about these.
Sure.
Equipment was one of them. What did you change in 2014 versus 2019? And that's from Doug. And then Jim wants to know, what would you throw out now that you changed, or what would you keep?
I changed virtually everything. I got a new tent. I got a new pack. I had the same sleeping quilt rather. For the first few months, I had a 20-degree sleeping bag, but then I changed it out for my 2014 30-degree quilt, and that was great. And I really loved that.
You know what brand? They're going to want to know brands.
Catabatic Gear Palisade 30 was my quilt, and my Big Agnes was a mummy bag, a 20-degree mummy bag. In terms of the tent, it was a Z-Pax duplex, and that's kind of all the rage, and it seemed to be the most popular one this year. And frankly, it works beautifully. It's a big tent. It's 19 ounces, Glenn, 19 ounces. And then my backpack, which was my first time round, was a Gregory, which was great, by the way. That was 4.5 or 5 pounds. This time, my Z-Pax is 19 ounces as well. So getting the weight down was substantial. Obviously, all my clothes are different.
Let's be honest. Your first hike, you started with like 60 pounds. I mean,
well, it was 42, but yes, often it was 45. Yeah, it was kind of getting quite heavy. But yeah, so working it out, once I got rid of my winter gear, I got down to about 27 pounds, which is still heavier than a lot of people out there. But frankly, I'm a big guy. I can take 27 pounds really easily. And then even though I did slack pack some, after half an hour of a 27 pound pack on your back, I didn't feel it at all. It was fine.
Good. So as far as shoes, people also wanted to know what shoes. You wore boots the first time, if I remember right. Did you stick with boots?
Well, I had Asolo boots first time, and they lasted me 1,000 miles, which was great. And then they started getting a bit manky at the front. So my wife at the time, she got them to send me a free new pair, a replacement pair. So I basically did effectively one pair of boots for the whole trip. And luckily enough, I did almost the same this time. I had some Oboz boots, which I loved, by the way. They were so comfortable. And their deal this year was if you register your boots and you're going to do a thru-hike, you'll get 2 free changes of boots. So just before Pennsylvania, because I knew what was going to happen then, I sent for my new pair. I got those. And then just before New Hampshire, I changed them out again. So I effectively did 3 pairs of boots, but it only cost me 1 pair, $240. But even then, it seemed to be worthwhile compared to a number of people who are changing out 4, 5, or even 6 pairs of trail runners.
Yeah, I know that the trail runners usually last 500 miles, and then they're changing them out.
Oh, at a push. Yeah. You're really pushing to get. I think 500 miles is a lot to get out of trail runners from what I've seen.
So your feet were good this time. I mean, blister wise and otherwise.
I've now done 4,500 miles on the AT and have not had a single blister, nor an inch of chafing. We won't bother going into that detail, but yeah, no, not a single blister. But my toenails are pretty bad, and I went to a podiatrist when I got back, and they cut off the ones that were loose. But yeah, I mean, it's fine. My feet are fine. Still haven't got a blister.
Did your podiatrist look at your feet and go, "Oh, you're a hiker, aren't you?"
Actually, he didn't. But because I'd already told him the story. But he said, considering you have hiked that distance, your feet are in remarkable shape. So
well, good. Not too bad for a 65-year-old guy. 66.
Oh, I'll be 67 in October. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So continuing on the line here of subjects, food came up a lot with your listeners. And Donald wanted to know, Mighty Blue, congrats. I enjoyed the podcast. By the way, I'm not going to say all of those because everybody says that. Right. Thanks for sharing your experience. My question, how much time did you spend preparing food drops more or less than the first time? And I remember you saying in between the 2 hikes, I'm going to do less food drops because you can just buy stuff.
Yeah, that was one of my big takeaways, something I definitely learned. If you can do food drops, and some people really prepare their stuff, they dehydrate their own food. But once again, in much the same, I guess, the same way in which I spent more time in hotels and hostels, this time I was prepared to buy pre-packed, pre-freeze dried food. So I had no packages sent. The only package I had sent was a change out of my gear from my winter gear to my summer gear, and my ex-wife Diane did that for me, which was very good. She supported me the whole way. She was always helpful in trying to find out, if I was safe and so on. But in terms of food, I would just go into town. Walmart is a great store. You can get Mountain House meals there. Trailtopia sent me some meals in the first month or so of the hike, which was great, and I really appreciated that. Snickers bars became a massive favorite again, and peanut butter is what probably stopped me losing less weight this time. I was eating, if I buy a jar of peanut butter, it would be gone within 24 hours. And a couple of times it went at a single sitting, which is embarrassing, I guess, to admit. And M&Ms. I loved it. Peanut M&Ms and Snickers. They were my snack of choice.
Peanut butter is definitely a theme in that group, right?
Yeah, it seems to be. Yes, it definitely seems to be. Yeah, there's something about it. It's just so glorious. And no, I lost a lot of weight still. I lost 50 pounds. And I know my face looks thinner, which is why I've still got the beard, by the way.
Yeah, I noticed you still have the beard. You're looking like me there, Steve.
Yes, right.
You're actually less gray than me, and I'm younger than you. That just makes me mad. So Julie actually said, do you still like peanut butter? She obviously listens to the show.
Absolutely love it. And in fact, since I've come back, I haven't bought it, though, deliberately. Because, well, that's not true. I bought it once, and as soon as I bought it, I ate it. So I've got rid of it now. Now it's finished. I haven't bought anymore because I will just simply eat it. I just love it.
I see, and I can't eat it straight up like that. It makes me so thirsty.
Oh, not at all. No, it's perfect. It's the perfect meal. It's a starter, it's a dessert, and it can be a main course.
A listener whose name I don't have wanted to know, were you using electrolytes every day, or did you use electrolytes?
I didn't all the time, and it was only as it's one of those things, Glenn. I tell you, when you go walking, when you go hiking for the first time, I don't think you realize how much water you need, and it took me even this time quite a while to realize how much water I wasn't getting, And I was trying to do 8 or 9 miles on a liter, maybe 2 liters of water sometimes. So now I've increased. I then started increasing the water, and then I felt that I needed more, and so I was then buying more and more electrolytes. So towards the end, every other liter of water I put electrolytes in. Yeah.
What was your favorite go-to meal on the trail? I know this one because I asked you on my show.
Biscuits and gravy. Mountain House biscuits and gravy is the fine. I'd never had biscuits and gravy in my life before. And so having Mountain House biscuit and gravy, that is the number one meal I've ever had. I think it's my favorite meal.
Mountain House, you're available to sponsor anytime.
Oh, totally, yeah.
Just letting them know. Put it out there. And so what was there a food on the first time around that you didn't do on the second time around, or vice versa?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Oatmeal.
No oatmeal?
I can't stand oatmeal. I loathe it with a passion. I ate as much peanut butter as I ate oatmeal last time. I love peanut butter still. I utterly loathe oatmeal. So I didn't have.
Were you having the biscuits and gravy for breakfast then? What were you doing for breakfast?
Oh, yeah. That was breakfast.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah. In fact, once I had biscuits and gravy for breakfast, and I also had it for dinner that night.
You're darn lucky Walmart carries that.
That's right. Yeah. So, it was a winner.
So we'll continue on the food line here. Jim wanted to know, what were the top 2 or 3 food stops along the AT this time? Your favorite places, restaurants, or whatever.
Oh,
you had a lot of them that you really liked.
I think I enjoyed. I'm just trying to think. Obviously, New York. The delis at New York are great. You can really fill up very, very quickly there. A bunch of pizza places. The brewery restaurants are all excellent. I mean, there was a great one. Oh my gosh, I wish I thought about this one now. There's a great one in Waynesboro. I can't remember its name. But one thing that was different this time from last time was that we were able to get Uber for most of the way up the East Coast.
It is nice, isn't it?
Oh, well, yeah. And to get an Uber from the trail to a brewery, how bad can that be? And you turn up all smelly and hungry and so
I was going to say, did the Uber drivers, did they put on there no thru-hikers because of smell? Is that on the app right there? No,
but as usual, the window would go down immediately because we were pretty strong. Yeah. I think most of the breweries, there's the Devil's Backbone Brewery. It was probably my favorite place of all. So somewhere in Virginia, I believe. And we stayed there 3 nights. We'd go back to a few times, and obviously they had booze, but they also had great meals there as well. And I think these places, when they're selling their beer, to have a good restaurant that goes with it is just a wonderful combination.
Well, now then I have to ask, what was your favorite microbrew? Did you have one?
I liked. I'm trying to remember the name of it. Well, I always like Yingling anyway. The Yingling is the beer I would normally go with choice, but we liked Blue Moon, Shock Top with a bit of orange in it, which is a little bit girly, I guess. There's Asher something or other white. Asher something or other white, yeah. And Allagash white. I really enjoyed that towards the end.
Very good. All right, so let's talk a little bit about lodging. Jim also wanted to know the top 2 or 3 places you feel people must stay along the AT.
Oh, no question. Woods Hole Hostel. There's something about Woods Hole which is such a warm environment. The food's good. The place is excellent and really well looked after. And Neville is an interesting woman. She gives great massages as well, which is a wonderful thing. And she is the strongest masseuse I've ever encountered, stronger than any other masseur that I've ever encountered as well. So yeah, Neville's great at Woods Hole Hostel. The Causeway Inn, which was somewhere near Marion. That was a beautiful place to stay. There was the Alpaca Farm. I can't remember what that's called. That's also in Marion. I think the better ones were in Virginia, to be honest with you, and further down south. And there are a number of different ones. But Woods Hole, I think, is number one. I think by most people's reckoning, that is the number one as well.
So we did have a question. I'm going to get into some of the general questions now. We had a question from Carol, who wanted to know, did Pennsylvania suck as bad this time as the first time?
Oh, equally. Absolutely, yeah. It didn't let me down at all.
So you're talking about my home state there, Steve.
There's no disappointment when it comes to Pennsylvania. I know if I ever did this for a third time, which I have considered, if I ever did this for a third time, then Pennsylvania might be one I'd avoid. But to be honest with you, though, it's actually only the last, I guess, 60, it seems to me, about the last 60 or 70 miles, maybe 80 miles.
Yeah, when you get from Allentown up, from there over is where you get into the trouble.
Yeah. And it is almost as if they route the trail over the worst rocks, and they're sharp. You virtually can't put your foot down on anything. And I don't want to give Pennsylvania a bad rap. It's a great state to be in. I really enjoyed being there. We had a lot of fun in Pennsylvania, but really, those rocks, they gnaw at your soul. And maybe that's what the Appalachian Trail is supposed to do. There are times at which it's going to gnaw at your soul.
Well, you often said that those rocks get you ready for the rest of the trip, though. They're kind of preparing you mentally for the
climb. Yeah, the climate out of Lehigh Gap certainly gets you ready for the rest of the trip. And it was something that I hadn't realized how much I was going to enjoy, that sort of hand-over-hand stuff. Who knew? I was good at that. And I was good at that as a kid. So, that's probably why I'm good at it now. As kids, we used to go to Wales and which is to the west of England, and climb up rocks all the time from the beach. So, that was certainly, I felt really at home in those rocks. But the rocks that are sharp on your feet, man, they really get you at the end of the day.
All right, I missed one food question. I did want to ask you this because I, for the first time, went to your home country while you were away, spent a week in London and England, and then we spent a week in Scotland. And so Mel wanted to know, did you find any fish and chips that were satisfactory along the trail?
Of course not. They don't exist over here, I'm afraid.
I thought the fish and chips thing was a stereotype, but my God, over there, they're everywhere.
But they're good as well, aren't they? They are good. I think they are anyway.
I was surprised, actually, at how much fish and chips there were, even in Scotland.
Oh, yeah. Oh, tons of fish and chips. It's like a staple, yeah. It's curry and fish and chips, and you're good to go.
Yeah, a lot of Indian restaurants. I was surprised at that, too.
Actually, funnily enough, I would say the microbrewery that I think it was in Waynesboro, had really, really excellent fish and chips.
So now we're going to get into people a little bit here. And I had a lot of questions about people. And I'm going to talk about Trigger. And I'm going to ask you some hard questions about Trigger. And Trigger, be prepared. Okay. So Anna wants to know, did you find your hikers to be different the second time than the first? And I'm going to add to that, what were the changes in the demo group that was hiking? Were there changes? Were they older, younger? Were there more women? Were there more minorities? What did you see change-wise for demographics?
Well, I think I've told listeners before, when I went in 2014, I think it was about 75% men, 25% women. But at the end, it was more like 50-50 because men are stupid. They make mistakes, fall off, fall over, get bored, whatever it is. Women were much more consistent with their hiking and carried on. This time, remember, I went a month earlier in February. Once again, women are more intelligent. They'll wait until it's warmer. So I think we didn't see that anywhere near as many women in those early months this time. But then, of course, the women started catching us up as we're older, and we got caught. So the women, the woman thing, that surprised me how relatively few there were in the times that I was hiking. There are definitely a lot more older people now. And I think one of the things, and I think I've said this to you before, Glenn, it took me about 50 episodes of this show to realize that our listeners listen to my guests and realize that this is for everybody. Anybody can do this. And the older demographic, I'm not saying that I'm responsible for that, but I may be partly responsible for people realizing in your 60s, there is no detriment. There's no impediment, rather, to hiking the Appalachian Trail. You can get out and do it. So I think really the demographic was different because I went a month earlier, and so I saw a difference there. But once again, the people, as they were last time, they all had their own stories, and I think they were just as nice. One thing I noticed when you go into camp, when you go into a shelter, because of the more accessibility, I guess, of data, people will turn their phones on straight away and they'll check and see if they've got data. If they have, conversation is so much less at shelters. But if they haven't, and I used to like this, I checked there was no service and put my phone away, and everybody would put their phone away because there was no service
choice,
there.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And this is the thing. Having no choice is a great thing. Limited choices is a wonderful thing because you then you do the thing that everybody else does, which is sit around and chat, which was I thought was really great.
So I don't want to dwell on this, but I do need to bring it up because it was part of everybody's hike this year, and that is the horrific death that was on the trail. How did it affect the people that were around you at the time?
I think we were all in our own fashion devastated that America had come to the trail. This isn't, that type of guy isn't prevalent along the trail as far as I can see, as far as I could see anyway. It was upsetting, and I said, and I don't know whether I said it on the podcast, and I apologize if anybody thinks this is two-faced of me, because I think people should carry on and regardless. But if I was a father, I said to one of the ladies I was hiking with, Dodger Dog, I said, if I was your father, I would have come and dragged your ass off the trail, whether you liked it or not, because I would have been too scared for her, and that would have been the wrong, by the way, that would have absolutely been the wrong thing to do. But that's how I would have felt at the time. And I know that a number of people quit the trail as a direct result of that happening. I would say one or two of them maybe there wasn't a reason to quit for them. It became
they were going to do it anyway here.
Exactly. It may well be. But it was, we were all impacted. I don't think anybody could feel comfortable. I think it was more of a reminder that however safe we say it is out there, and I think generally it is still very safe, however safe we think it is, I think that you just have to be aware of your surroundings. And I certainly think that particularly the women should make sure that they're around a bunch of other women or guys with whom they're comfortable, because it's just an unsafe place to be when you've got people like that out on the trail. But, generally you're not going to find people like that on the trail. So I would still say this is a very safe place to be. And I'm just so sad it happened. And I hate the fact that this year is more likely to be regarded, the class of 2019, as the year of the killing. And that's the sad thing.
And social media has something to do about that too. Just being connected to the news. If it was 30 years ago, you might have heard it through the hiker grapevine eventually.
Sure.
But you wouldn't have heard it as quickly. So
we heard about it straight away.
Right.
We heard it straight away.
Yeah. Whereas 30 years ago, that wouldn't have happened. So.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, now Trigger. So you met Trigger, and how long were you with Trigger? Was there ever a point where you were with Trigger that you went, I'm just going to be with this guy to the end?
Well, I don't think I said it in that way.
No, I didn't mean it that way.
I'm not sure, to be honest with you. Once again, I don't think you can really design your hike. He's not a person that I would have a lot of time with in normal life, because we are absolutely polar opposites politically, and nobody talks about politics on the trail, thank God. And there's a good transition, because he was very religious as well. So, and I'm absolutely not. So we didn't have a lot to talk about, but there's something about Trigger, for me, he made me accountable. He made me far less lazy. He helped me finish much earlier than I expected to finish, because he was always wanting to go further and go further. He would say I helped him as well. So I think we were very complementary. But I don't think there was ever a time I thought to myself, I've had enough of this guy. There are times when, I'd get kind of irritated that we didn't speak more because we didn't have so much to talk about. And but you know what? He was a very solid individual, and he certainly made my hike a whole lot better than it would otherwise have been.
You know what I like about that story is in today's environment, it just shows two people with polar opposite political views can still get along.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Yeah, we were fine. We never had a crossword. Never once.
But that's good. I mean, it just goes to prove that you can do that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I work with a bunch of people. Nobody knows what my politics are because I don't talk about it ever,
right.
Even on the shows or anything. So, and I work with a lot of people that are polar opposite. We could still get along.
You're wearing red. You're a commie.
That's it. That's it. Jack did ask a follow-up to that, actually. He said, did you feel like you were hiking Trigger's hike toward the end, or were you still hiking yours? There's a listener right there.
I was definitely hiking my hike. That is interesting. And let's go back. When I met Trigger, when I met Cushy and Cushy Life, and Cushy was a very much an outgoing person, very much a leader. And we were hiking, and I said this to her, so I'm not saying anything I haven't already said. We were hiking Cushy's hike for those miles.
You said that in the show too.
Up to Harper's Ferry, and I was okay with that because it made my hike better because I was then hiking longer days. But once Cushy left, we were definitely hiking my hike, and Trigger would do what I suggested. The only differences are he would whinge and moan when I'd suggest stopping, and then we'd go on a bit. So, I'm happy with that. I don't think I did anything on this trail that I was unhappy doing. So I think I was hiking my hike, although I understand the tenor of the question saying, was I hiking Trigger's hike? I wasn't. I was definitely hiking mine.
So this question came up by a lot of people who worded it in a roundabout way and were afraid to ask because I think it's one that nobody wants to ask. And that is the budget for the trip. Everybody wants to know how much you spent because they want to know how much they're going to spend if they hike it your way. Now, we did qualify earlier. You stayed in hotels a lot more this time. You probably spent a lot more in food this time because you were eating out, and those microbrews aren't cheap. No. So, do you want to address that or not?
Well, yes. Okay. Well, funny enough, even though our bills in the hotel may be expensive, you should have seen our bills in the microbreweries. Oh my gosh. The Trigger's often signed, and he ate more than any human being I've ever seen, by the way. He often signed a bill larger than his hotel bill that night. So, it was amazing.
That's not hard to do, though, when you adds up.
I haven't been precise, and I'm guessing, but I think I probably did between $12,000 and $18,000, which is a lot for 6 months. However, I'm going to tot it all up and work it out. And I will tell people when it's done. I haven't done that yet, as I say. But, you can make this as cheap and as expensive as you wish. For me, I wanted to get off the trail, so I did. For those who couldn't afford to, they stayed on the trail. So most people say a budget of $1,000. I would have really struggled to survive on $1,000 personally per month. But I know people who were surviving on $500 a month, so they were hardly ever out of the woods.
Well, there were several questions, and I know I've talked to you about this personally, but there were several questions about your wife because obviously in your book and in your podcast for a long time after your first hike, you talked about your wife quite a bit and her being a support and help, and not so much this time. So people are wondering why.
Yeah, well, I didn't tell anybody last year. I told one or two people, and I certainly didn't say anything on the podcast. But we split last year, and so I was on this journey of doing the Camino and then doing the AT, and so, but we're still close, and we spoke virtually every day on the trail.
And she did support you this time.
She did support me this time. So she's still my best friend, and we're just not going to be married anymore. Actually, we do finalize divorce soon, but we're fine. It doesn't always work for everybody. And as to use a horse parlance, this is not my first rodeo. And we've moved. We're just in different places right now.
And we still hear her at the beginning of the show.
You do, and you always will.
Okay, good. All right. So before we get into the post-trail questions, kind of to wrap this up, I have quite a few of those. I wanted to congratulate you. I'm a podcaster. I'm not a hiker, right? I've done day hikes, but I've done a lot of podcasts, about 8,000 episodes. So a little more than most people put together. And I know how hard it was for you to do those shows while on the trail. Congratulations for sticking with it. And thank you from all of us.
Thank you.
It wasn't easy. So there had to be nights where you sat down at that microphone and said, I can't do this, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Well, I didn't record every single night. I would write something most nights because I've got much more notes than I actually use. And I use those notes to inform me of what had happened that day. So when I was going to, sometimes I would record 2 or 3 days later, but I would have had the notes. And those notes triggered memories. And because those memories were triggered, hopefully it sounded like you were getting a pretty good overall view of what the journey was like. My biggest sadness was that on the last day, the audio, because of the wind, was pretty in and out.
By the way, you said it wasn't that bad from a listener point of view. No, okay. I love that. I'm so glad you did it. It was not that bad. We expect that because we want to hear it, right?
Right, yeah. Glenn, tell him I've had so many lovely responses for that last episode as well. So I'm delighted with that.
One of my favorite episodes, by the way.
Oh, great! I'm so pleased.
Yeah.
No, it was logistically quite difficult sometimes.
It's just difficult to upload the sound files sometimes.
Yes, it is.
Bad connections.
Yeah, bad connection. But I actually did it in the woods a few times when I got enough data. But I got there in the end.
Now let's put a plug out for your editor, who did a fantastic job of this time, all throughout your run. Ryan's a young lad, and we're actually going to do a podcast with him hiking the Appalachian Trail next year. So there's going to be some sort of continuity there. I'm not sure how we're going to do that one. I might actually get him to do pretty much what I did, so that might be fun. Ryan, from one editor to another, you did a fantastic job. So
I'm sure he'll be pleased.
Good job. All right, now to the post-trail questions. As your AT thru-hike was nearing its end, Jim wants to know, what 3 things were you looking forward to or craving the most when you got back home? And from your previous answer, I would say nothing. You really wanted to keep hiking.
Peanut butter. No. Let me think. What was I looking forward to? I was looking forward to flush toilets. I was looking forward to a shower when I wanted to, water when I wanted out of a tap.
Have you taken 3 showers a day, or are you still going feral?
I've taken at least 2 every day, yeah. and there's some of it I can't get rid of. I'm not sure what it is, but no. I was looking forward to resting, but as I said to you earlier on, this is the recovery process is different for everybody, I'm sure. But I just like the idea. I just wanted to sit down and not hike sometimes, but I'm missing it. And I say, having done no exercise at all, I'm missing that a lot.
You did this partly too, you said it earlier, and I know it was something that happened on your first trip. You lost 50, 60 pounds and then gained it back. Are you going to try harder now? Is it on your mind, gaining it back this time? It is on my mind.
Certainly not a target. I've lost relatively so much weight. And even though at 203 pounds, down from 254, I'm probably overweight from all the statistics, but I'm definitely skinny compared to what I look like normally. So I
can tell just by looking at you right now.
Yeah. Well, 225 or 230 might be a good number for me. So I'm aware of it. And when I move into my new place, there's a gym there. I'm starting to eat more healthily. So hopefully that will maintain itself. Or I don't expect to stay down there, but I expect to get to 220 to 230 and be happy with that.
Less peanut butter would be good. I'll help you.
Yes.
Yes. Less microbrew, probably. Doug wants to know, will you be writing another book? And that came up several times from several people.
Well, it's gratifying that people would ask. I'm not terribly sure how interesting a second book would be, but maybe it will be because I've got some good comparisons or contrast to make. And I've got to look through my notes to see if it's worth writing. For me, it's going to be worth writing in terms of whether I think I've got a story to tell that's different from the story I had last time. But I definitely had a different hike, so perhaps the answer is probably yes.
And the thing is, this time too, you've already told it in the form of your podcast for the whole trip. You've kind of told the story as you were going along, which you didn't get to do the first time.
I haven't told everything. I can tell you. I was aware of the possibility of writing a book.
That's good. Good point. And there were many, many requests, by the way, for you to have Trigger on if he'll come and do an interview. Everybody wants to hear from Trigger post. So
I think he will. He's quiet, but I think he will.
Okay. JD wants to know, now that it's all over, how does your body feel this time compared to how you felt the last time? And you perfectly mentioned that it took months for your body to fully recover for the first time. Do you think it'll be the case this time?
No, actually, I think I finished stronger this time. And I think because last time I finished at 185 pounds, which if you look at me now, Glenn, that's 25 pounds lighter than I am now.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's downright skinny, actually.
Yeah, I was skeletal. And so I think I'm going to recover better this time. I still feel strong. I was climbing those hills at the end really, really quite comfortably. And so I think I'm going to recover a little bit better. I know what to expect. I won't be pushing my body so hard to try to feel better.
Somebody asked, and I can't find who it was right now, if the Florida trail's in the works at any point, or would that be too boring because it's just pretty much flat, 1,100 miles of flat?
Well, I don't think it would be boring at all, but I'm told a lot of it is wet and you're wading knee high in water sometimes, and that's not desperately attractive. And there's a lot of road walking apparently.
Yeah.
But I certainly wouldn't rule out doing a section of it somewhere near Ocala, near where you are actually, funnily enough. That might be lovely. I might enjoy that because that's through a forest. And there's something about walking through a forest which really enlivens your spirit and makes you feel warm and comfortable, even if you're freezing cold. There's something about it that's just so otherworldly.
And we do have alligators and more poisonous snakes and things and bugs bigger than you've ever seen. So, that would add a whole new adventure to it.
Oh, yeah. It'd be a good time to go in the winter, though, wouldn't it?
Yeah, in the winter would be the only time.
Yeah.
All right. You hinted to this earlier, and it's probably going to be the last question here. Many, many people asked, are you going to hike it the third time? And you kind of hinted that. So how long was it between 1 and 2? 5 years?
5 years.
So you'll be 71 when you do the next
one.
one.
No, I wouldn't be. If I'm going to do it, I'd do it again in 2022 when I'll still be 69. So apparently I'm now the 16th person to do it twice in their 60s. So I think I'll be the first or second to do it 3 times in their 60s. And if that's the case, I would consider it. And, this is amazing. It's a bit like when women have a baby, they say, I'm never going to do that again. And then they go through the pain.
Yeah,
and
you're only 2 weeks out.
That's right, exactly. I'm only a couple of weeks out. I mean, the baby's still not sleeping through the night, So it's certainly not within. It's not within the realms. I haven't excluded it entirely, but I'm going to hike next year. Only a short hike I'm going back to the UK to hike round the coastline of part of the coastline of Wales, about 187 miles with my brother. So that'd be fun.
Oh, and what beautiful Scotland too. What beautiful countryside. Oh my God.
Well, someone said my brother in fact said there's a completed, they're going to open it next year, a completed coastal path of the UK, which is 2,700 miles long.
That would be nice. Beautiful.
That might be nice. Yes, that might be very nice.
We did see a lot of hikers in Scotland when we were up in the countryside. There were a lot of hikers out there,
and it is beautiful there, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I definitely want to go back to Scotland again, to the Highlands, and it was just beautiful. Yeah. So, what's next?
Well, I've got to get my life back. This has been this transitional period. I've got to get myself back and comfortable with who I am, why I am. I want to get my podcasting going again. And thanks for doing this first show back. I'm starting a new section Hikers podcast, and I'm going to do these 2 hikes next year. And I can tell people right now, Ryan's going to be one of them, but the other one I want, as the French would call it, a woman of a certain age. I want a woman in her 50s or 60s who's going to be hiking the trail to report from the trail, her experiences as well. And I think that will flesh out or fill out the various hikes, the additional hikes I've done to mine for the various different podcasts I've done. And I think those perspectives are really, really useful. And this experiment that I did this year, I'd like Ryan to do it the same way as me, literally recording while he's there and uploading the files for me to edit. Much easier that way. And then that will make its own show, and I think he's an articulate young man. So I think that'll be a good show for people. I want to write more. I'm going to write possibly another hiking book, as I say, and I'm writing a novel, which I've started I started when I was in Europe between the Camino and the AT. So I've got lots of things I've got to do.
Does the novel involve anything hiking?
No, absolutely none whatever. No. The protagonist will be banned from hiking in any way. In fact, he'll be banned from walking in any way, shape, or form.
That's funny. Well, from your listeners, I'm going to speak on behalf of all the listeners. We have really enjoyed your whole podcast up to this point, but especially this last 6 months have been so much fun to listen to. I've talked to a few of your listeners behind the scenes who are also listeners of mine over at the Horse Radio Network, because you have a lot of fans, as you know, with the Horse Radio Network crowd. Some of them met you on the trail. Right. There were and I want to end talking about your listeners, because you met a ton of them this time. And isn't that the coolest thing ever?
Well, you told me, and I haven't told anybody else this, but you told me, stop almost apologizing for or being shocked or embarrassed by seeing people. It became the most beautiful part of the trip. When you'd walk up to somebody, I say, "Hi, how are you?" They say, "Are you Mighty Blue?"
Well, your voice is kind of recognizable too.
I know, yeah. But some people did it without actually needing the voice. But because they knew I was around. Oh, I knew you were around this way. Can I take a picture and so on? I've really enjoyed the show. But one time we met somebody who wanted a picture of Trigger and not me. We cracked up, and we did. No, that was lovely to meet. It was really lovely to meet them. And something about podcasting, and this just for a second talk about it, something about podcasting, it does give you the opportunity, especially if you do the sort of podcast I do, to meet people who are listening to you and to see how influential you've been in their hike. And that's a wonderful thing. And that there is something about that I think it is so undervalued, but I think it's a valuable thing.
What listeners don't know is almost after every episode, I would write Steve a note. For the last 2 years, I've been writing him a note almost after every episode about the shows. And that did bother me when you first set out. And what people don't, and I was afraid it was going to come across wrong to the listeners, because you're very humble. You're a very humble guy, and you don't want to take any credit for anything. And yet, you know, your listeners love you, and they want to talk to you, and they want to meet you. And I think after that point, after we had that little discussion on the phone, I believe, your attitude changed a bit, and you could hear it.
I embraced it.
Yes,
I embraced it.
And thank God you did, because that is the most beautiful thing.
It was really lovely. I just loved it.
Yeah. Well, and I loved, my favorite things about your trip were the people you met and the interviews you did. One, musically, the music that you played on the show. But my most favorite thing were the families you met, because how incredible are they?
Oh, it was enough to keep myself upright on a trail, to keep yourself, your wife, your 4 kids upright. You know, I mean, how difficult must that be? And yet they did it with a joy, with a realization of what they were doing for the kids. I just loved meeting them.
Well, if I had an ale right now, and if you had an ale right now, we'd both hold them up and say cheers to the class of 2019.
Cheers to the class of 2019. So there we are. Glenn's a really skilled interviewer, and I'm delighted that he agreed to do that. I hope you all got something out of it. Because it was quite a long interview, I'll not be adding a middle section this week, though I'm hoping to add one next week. If any of you have some ideas on a middle section, I'd love to hear from you. In fact, if you've got any ideas on any part of the show, just let me know. I want to know. I want to make sure that you get the show that you want out of Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail. Email me at steve@hikingradionetwork.com with your ideas, and I'll consider them all. Next week, I'll be back with another guest, somebody who will enhance your knowledge of the Appalachian Trail and who will have a story that only the Appalachian Trail can provide. Now, here's the preface and the first chapter of Paul Stutzman's great AT book. Hope that you enjoy it. It's Hiking Through. I'll see you next week. Hiking Through, One Man's Journey to Peace and Freedom by Paul Stutzman. Prologue. Cautiously, I stepped on the narrow boards traversing the bog. 2 weeks of almost constant rain had brought the water to the top of the wooden walkway, and at several points the path was completely submerged. A tenuous passage, this was the only route available through the swamp that stood between me and the peak of the mountain. I was nearly to the top of Mount Success in New Hampshire, and after crossing this bog and summiting the mountain, I would be less than 2 miles from Maine, the 14th and final state in my thru-hike of the Appalachian Trail. The click, click, click of my hiking poles was the only sound I heard as I crossed the shimmering quagmire. Over the years, rain had accumulated here and created a primordial soup of water 5 feet deep, seasoned with decaying trees, vegetation and insects. As I planted my left hiking pole on a half-submerged board, the tip of the pole slipped away and the momentum of the 30-pound pack on my back destroyed my precarious balance. I heard my own shrill scream of, "Oh God, no!" and the bog added a weary hiker as another ingredient in its murky depth. I sank up to my backpack in the mud. Like a drowning man flailing for a lifesaver, I scrambled to escape, grabbing the board where I'd been walking just seconds earlier, leaning forward over its steadfastness, slowly wriggling my body out of the bog's grasp. As I lay frightened and gasping on the narrow wooden path, I saw the picture of myself covered in decaying muck and slime and muttered, "Congratulations, Mum and Dad, it's a boy." I lay there for several minutes, contemplating the journey that had brought me to this lonely spot where I was exhausted, indescribably filthy, and facing who knows what around every bend. I could have been warm and dry and well fed at home. I could have been back at work, in a safe routine, productive, earning a paycheck. Oh wait, I gave all that up so I could be out here alone in this cold, rainy, godforsaken bog. Chapter 1. The Big C. It always happens to someone else. A knock on the door late at night while parents lie in bed wondering why a child is not yet home. A call from the hospital saying a spouse is waiting in the emergency room and heart-wrenching decisions must be made. For me, it had always happened to someone else. Death's bony finger had lifted people out of my sphere, but so far that grim reaper had only worked at the periphery of my life. That all changed with one phone call. My wife, Mary, called me at the restaurant I'd managed for 17 years. Her strained voice said, "It's malignant." My mind raced. Benign, malignant, which was good news, which was bad? I couldn't remember. What does that mean? "I've cancer." The words jerked out between sobs. I told Mary I was coming home, hung up the phone, dropped my head into my hands, and the first time in years, wept. The daily calendar on my desk caught my eye. On that day, August the 30th, 2002, the meditation came from the lyrics of an old song I had often sung growing up in the conservative Mennonite church, "God of Grace and God of Glory." I ripped off the calendar page, thinking that I was indeed going to need the wisdom and courage spoken of in the song, but I did not know how desperately I would need help in the coming months. That page is still tucked away in my Bible. At home, Mary and I held each other and determined to battle the disease together, my wife with her faith and spirit, and me beside her every step of the way. After my high school graduation in 1969, I worked as an orderly at a local hospital. Every morning, the night shift gave us reports and updates on the patients in our care. The charge nurse's habit was to use the letter C whenever cancer was in a report, so that became our lingo, never using the actual word cancer. That word strikes fear in people from all walks of life and all economic brackets. However, if caught early and given proper treatment, many types of cancer can be cured or controlled. A diagnosis of cancer today is not always a pronouncement of imminent death. For Mary, it was breast cancer, and we would soon become all too familiar with its statistics. 1 in 8 women will be diagnosed with breast cancer. It sounds more optimistic to say that 7 out of 8 women will suffer with this disease, yet almost everyone will surely know someone, maybe someone dear to them, diagnosed with breast cancer. Unfortunately for Mary, the diagnosis came too late. With cancer in her family history, she had been faithful in yearly checkups and mammograms. Several years before, her mammogram showed a spot, but we were told it appeared to be only a calcium deposit. In retrospect, we should have sought another opinion, but regrettably we did not. We were oblivious to the growing danger until menopause reared its ugly head. Mary's difficulties during menopause had become frustrating, so she sought the counsel of a doctor recommended as an expert on menopause. But the menopause nuisances suddenly became secondary when the doctor learned about the abnormality in Mary's latest mammogram. She immediately ordered another test, followed by a biopsy. And now the results were in. That big C was written on the chart of Mary's life. My wife was now that one woman in 8. Our children must be told. The two oldest were living at home and were soon informed, but our youngest daughter was 3 hours away at college, and Mary decided to drive to Western Ohio and spend the weekend with her. Realizing that mother and daughter needed the time together, I decided to stay at home. That meant a weekend apart from my wife, and we'd been dealt a numbing blow. I found myself reverting to one of my own stress relievers, dreaming about hiking in the woods without a care. For years, one of my favourite daydreams had been about thru-hiking the Appalachian Trail, the AT. I nursed the dream tenderly, but never thought it would become reality. Mary knew how much I loved hiking, and I had often shared my dream with her. So with my wife's blessing, I did more than daydream. While she visited our daughter, I spent my weekend at Harper's Ferry, West Virginia, the headquarters for the AT. Harper's Ferry is where abolitionist John Brown raided the U.S. Armory in his fight against slavery. Today, it is also the location of the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. The state of West Virginia has only 4 miles of the 2176 that make up the Appalachian Trail, and those 4 miles of trail go right through this little town. I explored a small section of trail in both directions from town. A short distance south is Jefferson Rock, a high stone outlook where Thomas Jefferson once stood and admired the view of the Potomac and Shenandoah rivers rushing together in the valley below. I walked a little farther south to where U.S. Highway 340 crosses the Shenandoah River. There, the Appalachian Trail disappears up into the surrounding hills. What was up there, around the next bend, over the next mountain? I stood for a long time, contemplating what it would be like to hike the 1,000 miles from Harper's Ferry to Springer Mountain, Georgia, the trail's southern terminus. I promised myself that one day I would come hiking out of those woods and down into Harper's Ferry. I'd cross town and follow the trail across the footbridge over the Potomac River and hike along the C&O Canal towpath northward into Maryland, exploring every bend in the trail, soaking up every scene with my sights set on the AT's northern terminus, mighty Mount Katahdin in Baxter State Park, Maine. Someday. After stopping at the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, where I picked up some valuable trail information, I wanted to visit one more historical site. St. Peter's Roman Catholic Church, built in 1833, was the only church in Harper's Ferry to escape destruction during the Civil War. Its steeple soars above the little town, and the trail passes within several feet of the church's front door. I'd never been inside a Catholic church in my life, but I felt compelled to enter this church to pray. I was the only person in the sanctuary. I knelt and prayed for Mary and our family, for strength and wisdom for the journey ahead. I believed that God could heal my wife if he chose, and I pleaded with him for that healing. This conservative Mennonite boy was on his knees in the old Catholic church, knowing how much we needed what only God could give. We would fight. We determined to learn everything we could about breast cancer. We knew that the right treatment increased the survival rate for breast cancer patients. We were hopeful that would be the case for Mary. We researched, looking for the place to get the best treatment. We soon learned that health insurance coverage would define our choices. Discussions with Mary's doctor and the insurance company determined that a mastectomy was necessary. The next week was full of meetings with staff and surgeons, one of whom was the plastic surgeon who would immediately construct a new breast using both an implant and muscle tissue from Mary's back. A mastectomy. Removal of the entire breast. But we discovered that the insurance company was required to pay not just for the reconstruction of a new breast, but also for any necessary procedure to then make both breasts symmetrical. At some point, Mary could have a nip and tuck done on her other breast. My wife was delighted. Rather than focusing on losing one breast, she was excited about having 2 new ones. That was my wife. We approached her surgery, which was scheduled for the first week of October, with optimism. Mary was convinced everything would be fine and refused to even use the word cancer. The surgery seemed to go well. We sat in her hospital room afterward, waiting for her oncologist and hoping that the worst was behind us. The doctor arrived and took a seat by Mary's bed. The surgery had gone well, he reported, but they had also removed numerous lymph nodes. Then the doctor got up, walked across the room and closed the door. Dread washed over me. The cancer had metastasized to Mary's liver. The prognosis was not good. The cancer was already stage 4, the final, extreme, worst stage of development. There would be no cure, no stopping the disease. The only thing that could be done was to contain it as long as possible. Did I even want to know? Regardless, I had to ask, "How much time do we have?" We were stunned by the reply. Several months, maybe several years, depending on Mary's response to treatment. The bottom dropped out of our lives. The doctor discussed treatments and then left us alone to hold each other and cry. But later that night, in her hospital bed, Mary awoke to a feeling she described as the hand of God reaching down and holding her. She was filled with incredible peace, and she was convinced God was going to heal her. Through years of surgeries and setbacks, my wife never wavered from that belief. Chemotherapy left her sick and humiliated at the loss of all her hair. Countless blood tests and treatments made it increasingly difficult to locate good veins in her arms, so one surgery installed a port in her shoulder to allow insertion of a needle, but the port only worked temporarily, so another surgery removed it. Then there was an infection around her implant, and another surgery removed that. Every setback that occurred was met with, "All will be well," from Mary, and I marvelled at her positive attitude. Over several years we adjusted to new routines. Our life was now built around chemotherapy, hospital trips and blood tests. My wife had many good friends who helped out by driving her to tests and treatments, and sometimes life even felt almost normal. But early in 2006, we knew that the battle was not going well. Mary's weight kept dropping, and she was growing weaker. It was gut-wrenching for me, a healthy man, to watch the girl I dated, fell in love with, and married, now weakening, fading away, shrivelling. I begged God to either heal Mary, as we felt he had promised, or take her home. Mary never lost her faith in God or her belief that she would be healed. How I admired her courage. The day came when the doctor called our family into his office and advised that it was time to consider hospice care. And wow, what a reaction from Mary. She informed us all that was not going to happen, since hospice care was for people who were dying. Not until the final week of her life did she relent, and even then she declared she did not need it. But if we needed help, then she would allow it. The first week of September 2006 was so very painful, as one by one friends and relatives came to say their goodbyes. Thursday evening, September the 7th, surrounded by myself and our 3 children, Mary took her last breath and then was gone from our lives. What a harsh reality. My wife of 32 years was no longer alive. It had happened, but I almost couldn't comprehend the reality of it. I'd watched her body deteriorate, but always I clung to the hope that God would heal her, that her dying and leaving us would never actually happen. As our family sat and cried together, waiting for the funeral home to pick up Mary's body, I could not help but wonder what glorious things she was seeing. As a Christian, I believed that she was finally at rest, totally healed, seeing things and experiencing a life that my mind could not comprehend or imagine. The following days were filled with the decisions we all postponed thinking about: choosing a coffin, finding a gravesite, writing an obituary, setting details about visitation and the funeral service. To make these decisions before your own passing is a great consideration for those you leave behind, who must deal with all those details at a time when thinking is numbed. My family was on autopilot, moving through the days and decisions because we had to. Friends, family and church surrounded us with care. On Sunday, September the 10th, we held a graveside service, followed by a memorial for Mary. It was an emotional time, and I realised how important the church family was to us and how fortunate we were to have a pastor and his wife who cared for their flock. Reality hit that evening, after everyone had left my house. I knew then I was alone, completely, utterly alone. I had depended so much on my wife, and already I missed her terribly. In despair, I went to God. I knelt by my bed and thanked God for giving me 32 years with Mary. I asked for wisdom as I went on alone, and I prayed I could help others facing similar sadness and grief. I did not know then what direction God would take me in. I only hurt. But when I finished my prayer, the seed of an idea had been planted along the edge of my mind. That seed held the small beginnings of a plan.